Hello everybody. This is going to be, we obviously can't cover everything that 3.1 has in this meeting. So I'm going to be just covering some of the, I think, most important things that you should be aware of. And I've also made a lot of training videos, and I'll be continuing to make videos. So make sure you have access to those. And those cover some more details that I won't be covering in this video, as far as setting up tests and that type of thing. So for more detailed training, look for those videos. If you have requests on any specific topic that you would like me to do a video on, kind of a software training video, just let me know, and as I have time, I'll try to do those. But we have a good library. I'm trying to keep them under 10 minutes, so there's shorter videos on specific topics. Like Anita said, this has been a pretty long project, longer than what we would have wanted, but I think we got a lot into this software. So to start out, I'm just going to go over the install media. So the install media that you can get off the Google Drive, just so you're aware of what's in here. So when you go into the install media, you have the important folders or documents. In the documents folder, most of the documents that you need for Summit, we have all in here. So any, everything from operators manuals to spec sheets, etc., should be found in this documents folder in the install media for 3.1. Brochures are in here. If you're upgrading, you'll have all of your upgrade instructions in here, and in there you'll also find the release notes, which I encourage all of you to please read through. I definitely won't be able to cover all of it here, but I'll go over some of the highlights. Also, of course, when you go into the software, you have your installer. When you're upgrading someone, so there's a few different scenarios. You could be installing new software, which is the easiest installation to do, or you could be upgrading someone. If you're upgrading someone, there's some extra steps you'll need to take depending on what scenario the customer is in. So for an upgrade, you'll just launch the Sierra setup.exe. And this is for new install as well, but for upgrade, you're just, and again, please follow the upgrade instructions or the installation instructions, which are found right here. You have the new PC install instructions and the software upgrade instructions. You have links to them right from here. But just so you're aware, if you're upgrading someone, you need to install the Sierra Summit first, and then either a reader or the acquisition one of the two of these. And then you have to uninstall the old version of Quick Report. So you make sure you don't miss this step here. It is in the instructions, but you have to uninstall the old Quick Report and then install the new Quick Report, and always do it in this order. And then if you haven't installed CAD Capture, you can install CAD Capture. It's not necessary if you're running 3.0 and you've already installed it. And then, of course, make sure you always update your help topics so you have the latest help topics in the software. The last two you don't have to do during the installation. I've already upgraded to 3.1 on this computer, and I upgraded directly from 3.0 just so you can see what the software would look like when you first upgrade. So there's really three scenarios when you're upgrading someone. There's a person that's upgrading, but they're going to continue to use the exact same workflow that they had before. So in that case, there's very little you have to do for that particular customer, because they're going to be using the same settings, legacy NCV, whatever EMG they're using prior. And so for that customer, all you need to really do is upgrade them and show them the navigator, maybe adjust the font size of the navigator, that type of thing. The second scenario is a customer that is upgrading and they want to start using, they've already been using EMG Plus, and they want to start using EMG Plus with the anatomy database, which allows you to filter through the muscles with the navigator. And please let me know if I'm going too fast. I know we've got a lot of different languages on here, so I can slow down if you need me to. But that's why we're recording this as well, so you can go back and listen if you need to. And also, please feel free to stop me if you have questions. The main purpose of this meeting is to answer questions and kind of give you an introductory training for this software. So back to upgrading. If you're upgrading someone and they want to use the exact same settings they've been using, but they want to be able to filter the muscles in the navigator, there's a couple steps you have to do to enable the anatomy database so that they can use the graphical filter in the muscles tab in the navigator, and I'll show you that. The third scenario is a customer who is upgrading to 3.1 and they want to start using NCS Plus instead of NCV, and maybe also EMG Plus if they've been using EMG prior. For that customer, you really have to plan on a whole new in-service because you're going to be training them on the new software. You're probably going to be setting up test setups for them, maybe setting up new reference values in NCS Plus. So it's a pretty comprehensive upgrade. For Cadwell customers, that's something we'll be charging for. We'll be charging additional training, either remote training or on-site training for Cadwell customers in the US, because a customer that's upgrading that needs additional training, it could take quite a bit of time, depending on the customer and their skill level. So just be aware of those three scenarios, how much time you need to devote. So you have the scenario where they're going to use their exact same settings. That is a pretty easy upgrade. It shouldn't take you longer than 10 minutes to do the upgrade and set up a couple things for them. If they want to start using the anatomy database in some of the protocols, that's going to take a little bit more time. Give yourself probably, an hour, 30 minutes to an hour for the upgrade. And if they're going to be using NCS Plus, and they've used NCV in the past, then plan on some real substantial training on the new software and also setup. So I'm going to start with just the home screen here. So in the home screen in 3.1, it looks very similar. We haven't changed a whole lot. We've done a little bit here, but just be aware you can always go to view and see your studies either at a study list or a patient list. In the patient list, one thing that we've changed is when you pick a patient, you'll see all the studies that were done on that patient. So even if you're in a tab that says like last 30 days or today's patients, for example, that's just for the patients. The studies, it'll show all the studies that you've done on that particular patient. If we go back to the study list, this is our traditional view that we've had for a long time. We haven't changed a lot here. A few things and go through the release notes for this, but all the export, archive, and delete functions are here in the tools button here. So if we want to export something or archive or delete a record, just click the tools button to get to that. You can filter by the patient name here, and you can filter by a specific custom field, and then type in a word, and it'll search custom fields for that word. So not a whole lot that's new here, but we're going to go to new study here just to get into the system itself. Here, notice one thing new in the patient information is you can change the font size. And most things you can now right-click on to change the font size. Except for tab data, that font size needs to be changed in system setup. So we're going to go to new study. And after you upgrade, the first thing you'll see is the navigator. This is really the main thing that's new for a customer that is using their same settings and upgrading to 3.1. So the navigator is going to show up. It's going to show up in a very simple format, so it shouldn't be too hard for someone that just upgraded to understand how it works. It'll just show with the Studies tab and an All Tests tab. So the Studies tab, you'll see all the studies that are set up. When you click a study, you'll see what's in the study. You can double-click on the study or double-click on a specific test in the study to start in that test. All Tests gives you a list of all the tests that are in the system. You can click on any of these tests, for example, Blink, and you'll see the Blink tests. SCPs, you'll see the SCP tests, and then you can pick the test you want. You can also edit your studies right from here when you're in the Studies tab. Now, the navigator for a new install, possibly all you may need to do is come into the Cadwell and change the font size to something that works for them. Because if they're using just legacy NCV and legacy EMG, then they really probably won't need any more than these two tabs. There are additional tabs in here. So if we go to the Cadwell, there's a tab for muscles. And for this, we need to make sure that they're using the anatomy database in EMG and EMG Plus. There's a tab for nerves. This requires that they use NCS Plus. There's a tab for ultrasound. This requires that they purchase ultrasound. and then you have tabs for Blink, RepStim, and RepStim, this also requires the anatomy database, but Blink, EPs, and Autonomic, those are just other tabs we can put in there. So right now, we can add Blink, EP, and Autonomic because they don't require adding any special tests or setups when you're doing an upgrade. So here we have studies, all tests, then a quick jump to Blinks, EPs, or Autonomic. What I'm going to do before I go much more into the navigator is add some of these other tests. So I'm going to add NCS Plus and EMG Plus to this test setup. So this, hit the home screen to get back to the home. And I'm going to go to Edit Test Protocols. And I'm going to right click and insert test and add NCS Plus. That'll load NCS Plus with our default settings. And then I already had EMG Plus because this was an upgrade from 3.0. But in this case, if I want the customer to be able to use the muscle filter, what I have to do is go into EMG Plus and check this box that says Use Anatomy Database. What that does is it hides their text list of muscles, and it gives you a shortcut to get into the anatomy editor where you can see all the muscles that are in that database. Now there's a caveat with this. If this is an upgrade and somebody's already using EMG Plus and you want to check this box, when you check this box, you need to go into any studies that they may have and redo the study list, because the muscles in the studies are pulling from these muscles here. And when you check that box, those muscles are no longer available. So if you have a person that's currently using EMG Plus and they want to start using the anatomy database, there is that extra step of checking this box and then resetting up their studies so in Edit Study List so that it has the new studies from the anatomy database instead of these old studies. The same thing goes with single fiber EMG. You can also use the anatomy database for that. So you can check that box, and if you do have any muscles in their studies, you'll need to reset those muscles up with the new muscle list that's in the anatomy database. Also stimulated single fiber EMG, and then the last one is RNS. So for RNS, if you want to use the anatomy database, you can use that for that as well. NCS Plus always uses the anatomy database, and there's an extra tab here to get to that. So now that we've done that, we've added those new tests, and in EMG Plus, we've enabled the anatomy database. Now we can go in and we'll just start a new study here so we can see the navigator. Now we can go in and we can see that now we have the muscles tab available to us and the nerves tab available to us. And then if we want to, we can also bring out the RNS tab and the ultrasound tab. We have ultrasound. And now we can see the RNS tab. RepStim has a filter that you can pick by muscle now for RepStim. Out of the ultrasound window, it just gives me the option to use ultrasound or concurrent ultrasound and then pick a site. And then I have muscles and nerves. So if it's a new install, so that's kind of the things you'll need to do. And like I said, make sure you go into, if you've added the anatomy database to EMG Plus, make sure you go into your study list editor and go into your studies, and you'll want to delete this list out altogether and add a new list from the new muscle list from the anatomy database. Okay, so you would just delete this out. You can leave it in here while you add the new muscles, but these muscles won't work anymore because they are pulling from the old text list of muscles. If the customer is going to start using NCS Plus, you'll also want to create studies. You'll want to probably delete out the NCV tests out of their studies and add tests from the NCS Plus menu. Okay, so those are all some special things you'll need to do if you're doing an upgrade. If you're doing a new installation, then I'm just going to restore settings here. I'm going to restore all. And in fact, if you're doing an upgrade, you could do this. If they haven't been using EMG Plus or NCS Plus yet you can upgrade them to 3.1 and then restore selected and just restore those two protocols from the 3.1 preserve file, and that will save you having to go through those extra steps of enabling the anatomy database. But I'm going to restore all, and I'm just going to restore our 3.1 preserve files so you can see what it'll look like when you do a new installation. So this is for a new installation when we go to new study. It'll already come ready to go with NCS Plus tests and EMG Plus tests set up in the studies. So these are all from the EMG Plus anatomy database, and these are all NCS Plus tests. So with new installs, it's going to show up something like this. You can obviously create your own preserve files if you want to have a preserve file that uses the old legacy NCV. It'll still come with all tests, and then the muscles tab and nerves tab, and if they're doing ultrasound, if they purchase ultrasound, ultrasound should show up as well. So this is what a new install looks like. A few things to know when you're in the navigator. You can, when you're in the muscles list, when you click a body part here, it's going to filter our muscle list. So if you click anywhere in the white, here's the full list of muscles for EMG Plus. Just by clicking a hand, now we're seeing just the muscles that are in the hand. If I check the common box, now I'm seeing just muscles in the hand that I've set up as commonly used. Okay, so to set this up, all you have to do when you're in this window is right-click on the region, and it gives you this window. In this window, I can decide which muscles are set up as common, and also if there's muscles that the physician or the hospital never uses, you can set those up as hidden. So if you check the box as hidden, that means that those muscles are never going to show up in the navigator. If you check the box as common, those muscles will show up when we have this common box checked. Also, the nice thing about common is if you double click on a region on the body, it will automatically add any muscles that are set up as common into the study window. And I'll just show you what I mean by that. So if I come in and I want to start right with EMG and I want to start in the foot, I can just double click on the foot, and it added all the muscles that I had set up as commonly used in the foot right into my study window. I can go back to the navigator. The navigator is always F7 in 3.1. In all test protocols, F7 brings you to the navigator, and that takes me to the navigator where I can select additional muscles from different regions. So that's how the navigator works in EMG Plus. You do have different filter options you can use. So you can do no filter, which just gets rid of that altogether. You can do a text filter, so now you can just click head. Same thing, but instead of graphics, it's text. You can look at innervation. So if you want to see a muscle, you want to find all the muscles that are innervated with a specific nerve, you just select the nerve here, and you'll see all the ulnar innervated muscles. Or you can look at roots and see all the T1 or T2 innervated muscles. And then you have your graphics. So there's different ways to filter through the muscle list, and those are selected down here. In the nerves tab, you have a couple ways to filter the nerve list. So this on the far right is your list of nerves. These are all your nerve tests that we have set up. If we want to filter those, we can either filter by anatomical region or by nerve. So if I click the right hand here, this is front facing, this is rear facing. If I click the right hand, I'll see just the tests that are available to tests that are in the, or nerve tests that are in the right hand. Say left foot, same thing, just tests that are available in the left foot. This does two things for you. It filters your list down, but it also automatically selects the side for you, so you don't have to make that side selection. You can also filter by nerve. You can do both, but if you just want to hit median nerve here, now you're seeing just the tests that have a median nerve site in them. You can do both, of course. So if you click out to the right here, it unfilters that. If I want to look at the right hand and then the median nerve, now I'm filtering this list even more by just ones that are in the right hand of the median nerve. So that's how the filters work. So that's all these really are. These first two windows are in filters. You can use the navigator with the buttons and knobs. So you see the pink square around this window. That means the pink knob will go through that window. So you can toggle through and pick a test using the pink knob. And this window is yellow, so the yellow knob allows you to go through that one. Same thing with the tabs. We can use the blue knob, since it's blue box here, to go from tab to tab. So if you have a customer that likes to use the buttons and knobs, the navigator is set up so you can either use the mouse or the buttons and knobs. However, for the graphical filters, you do need to use the mouse for that. But in EMG, we can see that the pink knob is the muscles. The yellow knob is the test, so when we're in the muscles tab, we can choose EMG plus or single fiber EMG plus. So that's the navigator. This is just a new way to get from test to test. But I'm going to start out by going into a nerve and just doing a couple nerve tests. So I'm going to just pick median APB and median F wave and median sensory. One nice thing about the navigator is these tests will go into your study window in whatever order you click them. So if you're not using a study, you can just go pick the nerves. If you already know the first nerves you're going to test, just pick them in the order that you want to test and then hit OK, and it'll add those tests to your study window. So here we have the median motor, the median F wave, and the median sensory. In the trace window, it's just a little bit different workflow than EMG plus or than legacy NCV. We have the sites that are available here in the trace window. So everything's in the trace window. So in this case, we have a wrist site and an elbow site. Using the store button is like trace down, it toggles between those sites. So just by hitting store, we go from site to site. I'm just going to put on some electrodes really quick here just so you can kind of see an actual response. Just give me just a second here. So using the stimulator, I can just increase the stimulus and then get a response. We're showing trace history as you go, so you can actually, this is called glowing, so you can see the response increase, and then that trace history disappears in the background. We're also using hold Mmax. So F1 is hold Mmax. That's keeping our best response instead of our last response. So if I slid off or moved the stimulator and got a not as good a response, it's just going to ignore that smaller response and keep the bigger response rather than keeping the last response. If we want it to keep the last response, all we have to do is push F1 and that toggles hold Mmax, and now when we stimulate, it'll keep the last response instead of the best response. Okay, so that's hold Mmax and glowing. Across the bottom, the F keys are the most commonly used functions for nerve conduction, and then the knobs are pretty similar to what they were in legacy NCV as far as simulating, changing the intensity, moving markers, and then changing your gain and your sweep. And of course, you toggle the knob to push it down to toggle between the two functions. But the F keys we have, let me just do another site. So I'm going to store to go to the next site, and that just takes me to the elbow and adds an elbow site here for me. This elbow simulation. So now we have two sites here. F2 is raster and overlay. So pushing F2 will overlay those. And then if we push F2 a second time, it actually overlays the XY axis. So you can actually compare morphology and amplitude of those two responses. And then pushing it again separates them. So if you want to quickly look at the compare amplitude or morphology, just push F2 two times, and then the third time brings it back. F3 is no response, so if I didn't think this was an actual response, F3 just turns off the cursors for that site that I'm on and marks it as no response. It's also an easy way to redo the cursors, because as soon as I turn off the cursors, all I have to do is click with my mouse and it drops the cursor wherever I put it. And it always puts the cursors in the order that they should be. So it's always going to place the onset cursor first, and then the peak cursor, and so on. Remember, we're only showing cursors for data that we're looking at in the results table. So if I wanted to see if I had duration set up in the results table, then I would see a third cursor for duration, or positive amplitude, or peak-to-peak amplitude. I would see another cursor down here for peak-to-peak amplitude. The distance field is here. You can still enter distance with the stimulator using the one button, or you can always just type with your button. You'll notice the distance field always has focus. So just by using a number key on the keyboard and then always hitting enter, we can enter the distance. We have a sweep here, so if we want to look out further on the sweep, we can see further out in the sweep. F4 is history. So if we want to see the history of a response, we just click F4. And now here, and I have it set to just show one at a time, here is the history of the different stimulations I made on that particular site. Hovering over it allows me to select white, and then clicking it selects that as the selected trace for that site. I want to pick this last one, I just click that, that's the one it selects. If I look, each site has some functions, and then the trace window has some functions. So the functions up here affect the entire trace window. These buttons are just for this one site. So in this case, I've set up to just show one trace history at a time. That's what that means. If I go to the cogwheel, I can change that and I can say show 5 at a time, or I can show all traces. So this is showing me all the traces when I hit trace history, and then when I turn it off, it just shows me the one. So this can all be set up in your test setup. You can decide what you like for the default settings, or you can change it on the fly here. The T allows us to do a new trial. So for example, let's just say that we didn't like this wrist and we wanted to do another wrist, but we wanted to keep the original for comparison. So I'm going to go back to wrist, and I'm going to hit +T, and that gives me a blank place to stimulate another wrist response. Okay. Now I'm just going to move the electrode a little bit so we can get a little bit different looking response. Okay. So now we look here and we have a T2 that appeared. That means we've done more than one trial, and it shows how many we've done. So we've done 2 trials. So if I click that button, I can now see the first trial and the second trial and compare them and decide which one I like best. So if I like T1 better, then I hit T1. When we move on to the next test, the software is always saving our trials as well as our trace history. So we can always go back after the fact and look at all of our trials as well as looking at our trace history. Each trial will have its own set of trace history. So whether I'm in trial 1 or trial 2, if I hit trace history, it'll show me all the different stimulations I've done for that trial. Going to the top of the screen here, we have a few buttons. These first 2 are to fix mistakes. So this one, if you hover over it, and first thing I'm going to do is change font size so we can see this a little bit better. So I'm going to go to the cogwheel, and I'm going to change the font size to a large. There we go. This first button is to fix the mistake. You stimulated something out of order. So for example, let's just do that. So let's just say I actually stimulated the wrist or the elbow first, and then I stimulated the wrist. Okay, so they're labeled wrong because I stimulated them out of order. All I have to do is click this button and it sorts them into the right order. So now it sorted them by latency, so now the wrist is in the right place and the elbow is in the right place. The second button is swap sides. So the swap sides is if I made a mistake. So in this case, I'm actually testing my left hand, but I had it on right. So I want to fix that mistake and I want to move all this data to the left side. This button takes the data and makes it a left. So now that data has been set up as a left side. Okay, so this button is swap sides. This button is insert site. So let's just say, for example, here I wanted to do a mid forearm stimulation for some reason. Okay, so I'm just going to click insert site, and here I can drop down and pick a different stim site. But if it's not here, I can just click right here above and type anything in. So I'm going to just type in mid forearm. And hit OK. Oops, hold on. then hit OK. Now it gave us a mid-forearm site. Now I can go ahead and stimulate that site. Okay. And now I have a third site. And you notice it added a segment there too, so I can put in a distance if I wanted to, and get a velocity. Actually, not much. So that's how we add a site. When you're in here, you'll notice you can drop down and pick a site or a segment. You can also add a different test type. You could add a different side, different recording site. So there's quite a bit of flexibility, but I think most people will just quickly come in here and maybe add a new site on the fly. This fourth button, the I, you'll only see this if in this test you have sites that are set up as hidden. Hidden means you maybe don't use them that often. So when we first started this test, we had a wrist and an elbow site. If we click this I, that means there's additional sites that are hidden. So I click that I, and now I see I had an axilla site and an herbs point site already set up, ready to go, and they were just hidden. So that's what this I is. The same gain and sweep, this is just your link. So you can actually link or unlink your individual sites. So right now, because they're linked, all I have to do is turn the gain knob and it adjusts all the sites. If I unlink them, then I can change them individually. So now I'm just changing this one site at a time for both the sweep and the gain. So that's what this guy does. The cogwheel is going to affect the entire trace window. Just 1 second here, I'm going to unhook so I have my hands free. Sorry, I was muted there. So the cogwheel gives me additional settings for the trace window. These should all be set up in advance, so you shouldn't have to go in here very often, but this is where you'd kind of set up the type of trace history options you want, whether you want to use glowing. So if you wanted to change anything on the fly, you could change it here. If you wanted to keep it as a default, you'd go to Edit, Save Test Parameters, just like anything else. So that's the trace window. The results table is quite a bit more flexible in NCS Plus. You can pick a lot more different options of results columns. You can combine columns together like you see here, where you have latency and then the actual latency number and then the reference value next to it. This can all be edited on the fly, or you can have this, typically you'd have this done in advance. There's 3 tabs here. There's a tables tab, a left-right comparison tab, you have a notepad, and then graphs you'd probably just use for hreflex there. So the notepad is a pad that are notes that you can take that are combined notes for the entire NCS Plus test. So anything you put in the notepad, you'll see in all the different tests. You can also add a comment column. This comment is just for this one site. So it's specific to the site, whereas the notepad is for the entire test. You can actually edit these results tables right from here without having to go into the test setup. And like I said, there's some videos on actually going in and setting up result tables and all the test setups for NCS Plus. So I'm not going to cover much of that here, but I can go to the cogwheel in the results tables and check edit result tables. That allows me to edit these right here on the fly. So now all I have to do is right click. Let's say, for example, I wanted to see a negative duration. So I can just right click and add a section. I want to see negative duration. And then I can right click in that section, add a parameter. Maybe I want to see the normal range. So now I've added negative duration, and it gave me another cursor over here in the result table. If I want to right click, I can move that left or move that right. Typically, you would have this already set in the test setup, so you wouldn't be doing this on the fly, but just wanted to make you aware that you can do all these setups on the fly with NCS Plus. I can right click that and remove the column if I want to get rid of it. Then I can go back to the cogwheel and uncheck that if I don't want to edit result tables anymore. I can also get to my reference limits from the Cadwell. So if I click the Cadwell and go to reference limits, I can see all the reference limits that I have set up. I have a video showing how to set up reference limits, so I'm not going to spend time on this, but you can see here that it's really easy to get to, and once you're here, you can adjust reference limits on the fly if you need to. Also in here, font size, notepad, word wrap, just some other customizations you can do. Then you can get to the color editor from here as well. The color editor is here as well, and this is where you can go through and really you can define whatever color you want. I would probably start by unchecking the ones you're not working with, so you're just looking at NCS Plus, and now you can go and really pick whatever color you want for all the different options in NCS Plus or single fiber. You can have some favorites, so you can go color, they'll just switch it to another color and a third color, so you can set up favorites, so you can swap between colors. This is more probably for a demonstration. If you wanted to show your workspace in different color ways, you could set it up differently for different demonstration modes. Moving on to let's move on to the next nerve here. So we're going to do an F wave. So I'm going to swap sides back so we're back to where we were. So we have a right median motor, and we're going to store, and that'll take, or we're going to go to the next nerve, sorry, either hitting next on the base unit or the number 2 button on my stimulator. And that takes me right into the F wave, and it keeps the intensity where I originally found the trace. I'm not plugged in right now, but and you're going to stimulate and get some F responses. Pretty easy. Usually I would put it in right after the motor so that you can go right into it and go right into F wave. There's other ways to do F wave where you can actually add it into the same test as a median motor, and I'll show you that in a second. And then for sensory nerves, this one I'm going to plug in for. For sensory nerves, a couple differences. And one thing you should all be aware of is in 3.1, we've improved the baseline and the stim artifact for sensory responses for both legacy nerve conduction and NCS Plus. So customers that upgrade to 3.1 should see an improvement in their sensory responses. So that's one reason to upgrade right there, probably a really big reason to upgrade, because there is a pretty big improvement in the stim artifact and how it affects the baseline. But with NCS Plus, with sensory, there's a couple of features. We're not using hold M max. We're using sensory response here. We have an improved function. That's F1. So already we're really trying to make sure that the stim artifact recovers quickly, so it doesn't affect your response. And then in addition to that, if you do have kind of a bad baseline, I'm trying to replicate a bad baseline, but this, for example, if you have a slanted baseline, whether it's because of stim artifact or 60 cycle, you can use the improve function, which is F1, and that just flattens your baseline out and should give you a little bit more accurate measurements. All we're doing there is subtracting out any slow wave noise that it's in the baseline to give you a little bit more accurate response. Other than that, sensory is very similar. You have raster overlay, no response, trace history, etc. In the sensory responses, I have history set up for my stim 3 button. So the way that works is I've stimmed a few times, then I hit F3 or the 3 button on my stimulator, and now I can just scroll through using the stimtroller's wheel and pick the response I like the best, and then store that, and that's the response it'll show. Again, F3 brings that up, and I can quickly scroll through it. I actually really like this way because the screen's not nearly as messy, and I think it's easier to go through and look at all your sensory traces rather than seeing them all on the screen. But if you wanted to, you could set up the trace history to show all, but I just have it set up as 1+. There's not much difference in NCS Plus with sensory and motor, so those tests are going to function more or less the same. But I'm going to go to the left side now, and I'm going to go to Navigator. F7 is always Navigator. And I'm going to bring in a different test type. In this case, I'm going to bring in a median with F wave. So with this, what I've done is we've set up a test that has a median wrist, and then an F wrist, and then a median elbow. So this is a little bit, if your customers are doing a lot of F waves, I think this is a nice way to set it up to make it a very efficient workflow if you want to. So in this, what I would do is I would just do a median wrist response, and then when I hit store, it takes me right into the F. If I don't want to do the F wave, I just hit store again and it skips it and takes me right to the elbow. But if I'm doing the F wave, now I'm already set up to go, so I can see me at the F wave, then I can store, and it takes me back up to the top where I can do my elbow. So I think this is a pretty efficient way to see the F wave, put my distance, and now I can see latencies, amplitude, and F wave all on one screen and all in one result table. You could do other things like, if you look in here, we have median with sensory or ulnar with sensory. So let's just say we want to do a ulnar, motor, and sensory. We can pick that one. This is just an example so you can see other things you can do with this test. So in this case, I'm going to do an ulnar wrist. And then below elbow, above elbow, and then last sensory. So then I just move my electrode and this in the sensory. So there you can see we can get sensory and motors all in the same trace window. So you have a lot more flexibility on how you set tests up, and then you can see all the data all in one spot as well. This is really preference. I think a lot of customers may still prefer to do things just one test per screen, but I think it's pretty nice when you have the option to do multiple tests per screen. I'm going to show you another test, and I'm going to go into test setup to show you how to do this. So this will give you an example of how to set up a test and show you some of the capabilities of NCS Plus. So I'm going to go and hit the home screen. That takes me out of this test. I'm going to go to Edit, Test Protocols, NCS Plus, and I'm going to set up a nerve test, and it's going to be a combo test where I do, I'm just going to right click. So I went to NCS Plus, I'm in the Test tab, and I'm going to add a test setup. I'm going to call this median 2-channel motor F and sensory. And what I'm going to set up here is the first site's going to be, so I hit plus to add a new site. The first site is going to be a median wrist. And then the second site is going to be a sensory median wrist. I'm going to do to digit 2. And then these are going to be 2 channels. So they're going to be, I'm going to simulate once and get a response for both. Then I'm going to do the third site, and this one I'm going to make the F wave. And then the fourth site will be the motor to the elbow. And if I wanted to, I could do a sensory to the elbow as well. So I could add another one here and do a motor or a sensory to the elbow, digit 2. So now I'm going to make this a multi-channel test. And I'm going to take this site and change this amplifier from channel 1. So I uncheck default. I'm going to change it from channel 1 to channel 2, and then do the same thing with this site here because it's recording from a different site. And I'm going to go from amplifier channel 1 to channel 2. And then now I should be ready to go. So I'm going to hit OK. Then I'll go to the new study, and we'll try that out. So we'll go to my nerves tab, and there it is right there. The colored icon means it's more than one test type in the test. So you'll notice motors are yellow, sensories are pink, and F waves are green. So here, go in and do that. And now I'm going to just give me 1 second here. All right, so I'm going to go in, and so you can see the test. It looks a little bit strange because we have a wrist motor and a wrist sensory, and then a wrist F wave. But it's actually kind of nice way to demo the system and really how you can be very efficient. So let me just get these. So I have 2 channels set up just to explain what I've done here. I have 1 channel set up to the APB, and the second channel set up to my second digit. So now when I stimulate, I'm going to get both a motor and sensory response from the same stim point. Adjust my location right. And then store, and that takes me right to the F wave. And then store again, takes me to the elbow. So there I have an elbow response. So now, in that quick a time, I've acquired motor, sensory, and F waves for the median nerve. And just because I recorded it like this, I can still show it. If I go to the navigator and I bring in the median motor, median F wave, and median sensory, I can still show those on individual test screens. So it doesn't matter how you acquire it, you can still display it in whatever test setup you have set up. That's called site sharing. So when we stimulate a site in one test, it shows that site in any other tests that use that same site. So you can really do a lot of fun things with NCS Plus, but mainly the biggest feedback we've gotten is it seems to be pretty simple and intuitive for people to use. And actually, I think it's easier for a new user to Cadwell. I think it's actually easier to learn NCS Plus than it is our legacy NCV software. It's a little bit more straightforward. I think there's a few less clicks for doing things like trace history, and it's a little bit more intuitive as far as how to overwrite a trace or delete a trace, etc. And by the way, just so you know, when you do hit delete on the base unit, it'll delete the trace, and then pushing it again will always bring it back. You can also delete traces just by hovering over and right-clicking. You can delete that single trace or the trial or all traces, etc. So that's NCS Plus. There's a little bit more to it, but that's kind of the basics to get through where you can at least demonstrate it. And typically, I try not to spend too much time on the settings when I'm doing a demonstration. I just try to show the workflow and just try to show it as smooth as possible. NCS Plus does work with the sentence generator still. So if you go to tab data, you'll see you can still use the sentence generator. Tab data, we've adjusted how this works actually, so you can see the results and the traces. And then if you go to the cogwheel and have it set up so that the patient info overlays the NCS Plus trace window, then when you hit patient info, now you see the results in the patient info. So you can uncheck that and just see the individual traces with the responses. You can adjust cursors here, or you can see all, if you've done more than one motor, you'd see all motor responses or all sensory responses, etc. The navigator brings me back, and this is where if I want to do EMG, I can just go right in my muscle tab and then pick the muscle that I want to start with. Or if I'm using a study, I may have EMG already set up. What I like to do in a demonstration is actually show a study that has EMG and ultrasound and nerve conduction all in the same study, so that I can really show the workflow of how you can really quickly switch between nerves, ultrasound, and EMG just with a click of a button. I'm not sure if I have ultrasound on this system or not, but I'll try it here in a second. So are there any questions just on the overall workflow of NCS Plus? Anything that's confusing or you want more clarification on?
It's excellent. Really nice. Great job.
All right, we'll keep going forward then. Thank you. So we're going to go from the nerve conduction straight to navigator to the muscles tab, and I'm just going to double click on the hand because I know that already has my common muscles that I'm going to test set up in it. Oh, I just got a question from Agnes. That's a good question, so I'm going to read it. So she said, if you have a combined study, sensory, motor, and F-wave, and then you use site sharing, how does it appear on the report? So it's going to show up as individual tests, but what you want to do on the results is you want to make sure that when you're in tab data, sorry. So what you want to do is go into this Cadwell and check this box, enable NCS Plus display by nerve. And that way in tab data, it separates out the traces individually into their own trace, print out in their own trace window. Because otherwise it's not very helpful to have, the display of all the traces together in one window, motor, F, and sensory. So by changing this Cadwell to enable NCS Plus display by nerve, then in your reports, you should just see an individual printout per like motor, median sensory, median F-wave like you're used to. It doesn't affect the tables at all, so the tables will show up the same whether you did the mixed test or whether you did a individual tests. So yeah, doing the mixed test shouldn't affect your reports very much at all, as long as you do that. Make sure in that Cadwell and tab data you display by nerve. Then you'll display it just these traces and then the same result tables that you use anyway. And again, from my experience, I show the mixed tests in demonstrations, but when I'm training a new user, they typically want to do things as similar to what they've been doing in the past as possible. So, not a lot of people are going to jump in and start using mixed tests right away. So I use it more in demonstrations than I've actually used in practice, because typically people want to do things exactly how they've done in the past. But it's a neat thing to show, I think. So I'm going to go into Navigator, muscles, and just so you're aware, when I go to the Cadwell here, I can go into the muscles tab, for example. So each tab has its own Cadwell. So I can go to the muscles tab Cadwell, and here I can decide maybe I want to see only show common muscles. So if I check that box, then it's always going to keep this checked by default. So when I click the hand, it's only going to show my common muscles. And then if I want to see more than my common muscles, I would uncheck that box. So each tab has its own Cadwell as well. So when you go into the main Navigator Cadwell, you'll see each tab here, and it has its own Cadwell. The Studies tab, for example, a little bit different options. On this one, you can set up what the F keys do. So when you first open a test, you can have the F keys launch a specific study, or like we have it here, you can have the F keys take you from one tab to the other tab. So you can pick what your function keys do when you're in the Navigator, when you're in a specific tab. The only other things in the Navigator that you may want to do is obviously the font size, and then whether you want the window to be a tabbed window or floating. Tabbed window just means it hides in the sidebar here. Yeah. I've got something wrong with my screen now, so it's not going to show up. Or floating is going to keep it open. I'm not sure why that didn't work. This box makes it so the next key on the base unit actually opens the Navigator. Instead of the F7 key always opens it, but for a customer that's used to having a next key bring up the next test, that they could do that. So I'm going to go into EMG and just show you a few things here. And actually, before I do that, let's pause for a second and go through the release notes. I'm not going to read through all these, they're pretty long, but I just want to go through a couple things that we've added so I don't forget them. So in NCS Plus, probably the highlights of this release for 3.1 is obviously NCS Plus, the new nerve conduction protocol, the Navigator, which we've shown, real-time review, so you can now set it up to see studies that are being tested. So you can sit at a review station and see, if you're using CADLink, you can see all the other rooms and the studies that are being tested in those rooms. So real-time review works for nerve conduction, evoke potentials. EMG, they can see EMG as long as they're storing the buffer. So any buffer that's stored, somebody at the review station can see that buffer live or as it's being stored. So this scenario is for maybe a teaching hospital or where maybe physicians do the EMG and technicians do the nerve conduction, or two different people do the test. So before entering the patient room, you could go to a reader station and open a test that's already open in the acquisition room, or the patient room, look at the test, look at all the results, and then go in and do the EMG. Or if you want to just review, or if it's a teaching hospital and the attending physicians want to keep track of the residents and the fellows, it's a good way for them to just monitor the nerve conduction studies and EMG. There's a few additions to CADLink data management. We have added the MS SQL support, so you can do SQL servers using CADLink. There's improved security, and there's some other improved enterprise features like shared servers and such. But I'm not going to cover much of HL7. We should probably set up another training session with the CADLink team if there's questions on CADLink and HL7. But I'm going to stick more to the sum of adaptation at this point. And then we've actually we've really added a lot of just small enhancements to all the protocols: EMG plus, single fiber, Blink, RepStim, Evo potentials. So when you have time, read through this and make sure you're aware of all the new things we've added to all the different tests. I want to just jump into EMG plus, make sure I don't miss anything here. So we've added new way to enter reference values if you're using the anatomy database. So you can enter EMG reference values by age, etc. We've changed some minor things as far as excluding and including traces. The big thing that we've done is we've reduced the size of the files. So if you're storing EMG buffers, they're going to be more than 10 times smaller than they used to be in 3.0. So file sizes should be a lot smaller when you upgrade to 3.1. You can now see the status of the amplifier on the trace window. You can close EMG plus windows just with the red X and right click to add additional windows. And then we've changed the scoring, and I'll show you that as well right now. So when you're in EMG plus, let's pick muscle here. The F keys have changed slightly because now F7 is your navigator, and F6 brings up your scoring window. So wherever you are, you can always bring up F6. And then in addition to that, we've added this entry table. This is the data entry table. And so if what you're used to seeing is this, and you now have this button to show the entry table, and this is just another way to score. So instead of coming up here and dropping down and selecting, it's actually quite a few less clicks to just come in here and just click, click, click. And then right here, you can add muscles and add additional muscles to it. So here we can click the muscle and then score that muscle, and then click the next muscle. So this is more similar to how people scored using Viking. So a Viking user will probably prefer this to having to go up here and do a drop down for each score. So that's new in EMG plus. We've changed some colors and things, and we've actually changed, when you install new, we've changed the views a little bit to try to simplify things. So I'll just go over that briefly. So when you start EMG plus, it's always going to start in spontaneous mode if you want it to. That's a setting you can change in the cogwheel to tell it which mode to default to. And then you have 2 views in each mode. So we have 4 modes, and we've changed it so that it used to be an F key for the view for some reason, but we have a view button on the base unit. So the view button on the base unit changes from view 1 to view 2. So for spontaneous mode, view 1 is just a blank or a very basic EMG screen, and view 2 brings up a trigger and trigger windows to see what's triggering. The trigger, we changed the trigger line to yellow just to match the knob. So the yellow knob adjusts the yellow trigger line. So it starts in auto mode, and as soon as you turn the yellow knob, it's gonna give you control of where that trigger line sits. So that's view 1 and view 2. In volitional, F2, this mode is more for looking at motor units and some recruitment. So in this mode, we haven't changed much in view 1. You still have the auto trigger running, and you can see the some live results of anything that's triggering there. But what you can do is you can actually change how many rastered traces show up here, which you couldn't do before. Obviously, you can show these either in a rastered view or an overlay view. But you can adjust how many traces actually show up here. Also, you can adjust the average count, so how they're average. So when we stop, we're seeing this is an average of the traces that are in white. So make sure that you're aware that when you're averaging things, it's set up currently to average the weight. It's a weighted average, so it's looking for the best matches and then averaging the best 8. We can increase that average count to up to 30. And if you want to just do a standard average where it just averages the last 8 or 30, you change that to normal average. So weighted average means it's going to average the best responses and however numbers you have selected here. And then you can decide how many traces to show in the raster and how many in the overlay as well. And then in a couple of things, so if we move off this guy and just drag a box, you can actually pick a mode unit that way. It's not going to look. Let's pull up some real data just so you can see buffers here. So here we have some real data playing. So if we stop that, you can always just hit plus to add this mode unit if you want. If you're going to be looking at some quantification of multiple mode units in a muscle, you can add that mode unit. Or we can just move the trigger off and just click the mode unit and add plus to add it. Or you can drag a box around the mode unit and then add plus to add it. The nice thing about the box is it gives you control of the duration, so you can decide exactly where the duration lines are going to lie. And then when you go to view 2, you can see all your results. So we added 2 motor units, and then here's all the results of those motor units. This is the motor unit that's selected. These are all the motor units and then the non-polyphasics. And remember, just by left-clicking in here, you can turn on or off any of these columns or rows, so it's not quite as complicated. Just put in whatever numbers the physician wants to see. So that's volitional mode. In auto-mup mode, there's 2 different views in this as well. The standard view, we've simplified it a little bit, so when you're running in auto-mup, you'll see it's automatically collecting. If there's too much noise, it'll actually stop collecting and give you a warning that they need to relax and they're recruiting or the muscle too much or with too much force. So you'll see here they display the muscles here or the motor units here, and then they drop down into the overview table. And then when you stop and you go to view 2, view 2 is going to be just another way of viewing that, but with your results. So you'll still see individual motor units, all your motor units together, and then your results table, either in a cloud plot, histogram, or a regular results table. Some minor adjustments we've made here just to improve the look of things. We've offset the peaks so they don't overlap each other. So there's just been some minor things done to EMG+. But one thing I want to show you is in auto-mup mode, you can actually bring up a window. So I'm going to go to view 2, and so we can just close these windows and then right-click and add new windows. So I'm going to bring up the new window we have, which is firing rate analysis. And there's also firing rate results. So this allows the user to see some live recruitment ratio information. So what we're doing here is when you're running, you'll see the motor units that are firing, and then we're doing a recruitment ratio calculation. So this white line is the recruitment ratio. So here we have 1 motor unit firing, and then the second motor unit's going to come in, which drops down the firing rate, and we start calculating the recruitment ratio. So when we stop that, what this is the white line is the recruitment ratio, the blue line is a reference value, and so we can see whether the recruitment ratio is within normal range, and we can also record results for that. So we kind of have a live recruitment ratio analysis or firing rate analysis. We're doing in a future software release 3.2, we're going to be improving our EMG analysis and hopefully make sure we're collecting all the MUPs and not missing MUPs and stuff like that. So this will improve a little bit as time goes. But this is a nice tool, both for teaching hospitals, just so they can kind of show residents what happens with firing rate as the single motor unit increases and then the second motor unit comes in. and also for some quantitative data to see whether your recruitment ratio in a muscle is normal. And this can analyze up to like 4 or 5 muscles. So if we're doing a different buffer, let's do one of this. Let's get in here. So when you turn those windows on, it's just going to automatically find the mode units and plot them and then give you a recruitment ratio. So in this case, it found 3 mode units, and it's just doing the math for you and then gives you the recruitment ratio. So the white line is your recruitment ratio. The blue line is your reference point. So it should be below the blue line for a normal muscle. And if you go to the Cadwell, you can adjust those things. So you can adjust your reference value here. So that's something new in EMG Plus. I think that's the main thing. Some minor things you can now change when you're in. We've made these purple because you move them with the purple knob, so you adjust those. Oh, actually, if you want to, that's a different setting. So you can actually adjust what the different knobs do. So there's 2 knob settings for EMG Plus in System Setup. You can do alternate EMG knob setup and look in the release notes so you can see what that is, but it adjusts the way the knobs work in EMG Plus to be more similar to, I think, what Viking users are used to, and also to just give you a little bit different workflow. So if you have that different knob setup, you actually can run stop with the yellow knob. So pushing the yellow knob will run and stop the EMG. You can adjust the cursor with the purple knob, etc. You can also, something we couldn't do before is you can adjust the duration markers right here in this window as well. Just gives you another way to adjust duration markers. I think that's the main changes that we've made in EMG Plus, the scoring window, and some of these new windows that you have options to get to. And I'll go into RepStim. Those are probably done most often. So in RepStim, remember, we can actually have a tab for that. So if you have a customer that does RepStims quite often, you can have a tab open for that. So you can go to RepStim and then just pick the muscle that you want to test. So in RepStim, we've done quite a few changes and improvements here. One is, you'll notice this is an option. You can just set it up to just show 1 train at a time. So let's go back to that. So I don't know if I have this turned on yet. I don't think I'm hooked up right here. There we go. Let's just do another muscle here. So we're only displaying one trace here. And then when you switch to train, to a train, and then when you go to the next train, it does it on a whole new screen. So this is an option in the test setup, whether you want to show them how it used to be, which was a list of all your different trains. But this is feedback we've been getting from quite a few users that they just want to see 1 train at a time. And that way you can increase the gain quite a bit bigger, a little bit easier to adjust the cursors this way. And then just clicking on the different trials here shows you the different trains. And of course, you see all the trains up here as well. So there's your train 1, train 2, train 3. We've made it so that you can show all the cursors all the time, so it's easier to adjust the cursors. We've improved the both the stim artifact and the cursor placement. So cursor placement should be a lot more accurate now in RepStim. And we've also made it so you can jump around, so you can skip things. So before you had to go in order. And now if you want to skip over one of these and just skip down, you can skip to wherever you want and store that one, or just do that 1 train. If you want to redo a train, just go back to the train that you missed and highlight it, and then stim, it'll redo that train. If you want to do a different frequency, remember these trials are already set with a specific frequency, rep rate, train length, etc. So if you want to do something custom, now you can just jump down to this blank one, and then you can set up the train and modes and frequency to whatever you want. Maybe you want a different rep rate. You can go up to, I think we can go up to 200 hertz now on the rep rate. That's new. And then you can pick a frequency here, or you can just type in a frequency, and it'll do whatever frequency you want there. So you don't have to select from the list. You can just type something in, and you can go all the way up to 200 there. But the nice thing is now when you do the train, it's going to keep those settings the same for the next one. So you can just skip over these preset setups of train length and rep rate, and you can go start doing your own at the bottom of your custom one. In the past, you were really kind of stuck. You had to go into edit test protocols and set this up beforehand if you wanted to make any changes. So now it's quite a bit more flexible, I think, with RepStim, and customers should like this option to just show one train at a time so they can increase the gain and show that bigger. Obviously, you can adjust the spread as well to make use of the whole screen. So that's some improvements in RepStim. In Blink, we've made some improvements there as well. And that you can bring up as a tab too. Let's just go ahead and do that. So in Blink, I'm not going to set this up, but we'll just, when you stim as store, you can store multiple trials, obviously. And then when you turn cursors on, we've set it up so it's these little bit longer cursors, but you can grab anywhere on the cursor to move it, so it should be easier to adjust cursors. And then we've also made it so F4 toggles between the IPSI gain and the contra gain. So you just push F4 and then adjust the gain of the contralateral traces or the ipsilateral traces. So you can adjust the gain of channel 1 or channel 2 together quite a bit easier now. That should improve workflow on this test. And go to the other side, same thing. Forgot to leave the cursors here, so we go back to auto cursors, adjust those where we want them, and then go to the other side and do as many trials as you want. So a few minor things in Blink, but they were things that people have been asking for a while. So I think they'll be appreciated by some customers. Let's go back in here to all tests. In evoke potentials, there's a few improvements. And again, I'm only going through some of them, so please read the release notes, and the help manuals are updated as well, obviously. In evoke potentials, just some minor things. You can now right-click and you can remove traces from the report. So traces that you recorded, you can just right-click and take them out of the report. That just turns those gray. So just highlight, the trial, highlight the trials that you don't want to print, and select remove from report and print those out. That's the main thing. We haven't changed a lot in this. We've improved the stim artifact a little bit on EPs, and I guess that's about it on EPs. The other one I wanted to show is EMG Plus. We haven't made any changes on ultrasound in 3.1, so it should be the same as 3.0, except for in concurrent mode. I'll show you that as well. Single fiber EMG, we've made some improvements here. One thing we've done is made it so, let's bring up some data so we can actually see something running. So one thing, we've made it so you can just grab this yellow trigger and adjust it on the fly so it doesn't disappear. So you can, as you're recording, we found some users really actually just like to use this big window when they're doing single fiber, and then adjust the trigger line here. So you can drag it back and forth, up and down, and trigger whichever peak you want to trigger on. So that's new, the way we're handling that. Obviously, anytime you run and stop, it starts a new run, and then the auto trigger starts functioning automatically. we've made it so that when you adjust the sweep with the knob, it's actually adjusting the sweep in the trigger traces window. So this window here, it seems like customers, this is the sweep they want to change more often. So now the blue knob adjusting the sweep actually adjusts it in this trigger traces window instead of the live window here. We've made it so when you when you stop, obviously you can go through and exclude traces manually. You can exclude traces with the trace box, or you can exclude traces by adjusting the window. But a couple of things people have been having problems with that I just want to review here is, let me pick a different buffer, see if I can give you an example of this happening. I think that's the same one I just did. Okay, so here's one. So when we stop here, we can add a peak just by clicking and dragging around that peak, and that should add the peak here. In 3.0, that didn't work quite as well. And then if you want to get rid of that peak, just uncheck it here. Now, sometimes you might have a peak that's not very stable, and it's causing the software exclude some of your other peaks. So the first thing you want to watch for when you're doing single fiber is make sure that you can see all the peaks that the software is picking up. So sometimes you may be in a test where you're, let me pull up another example here. So in some cases, maybe in a situation where you're only seeing 3 of the peaks, okay? So when you stop it, you're seeing 3 peaks here, but it's recording 4 peaks. So always make sure that you can see all the peaks here in this window that it's recording, because otherwise you could have a peak that's off the screen somewhere that's not a very good peak or a real peak, and it's affecting and causing your other data to be excluded, in which case you would just uncheck that peak. So what I would do is just make sure that you change the sweep in this window so that you're seeing all of the peaks, all 4 peaks here, or 5 peaks. And then of course you can add additional peaks, and then you can take those away. You can scroll through the bar. This is new. You can scroll through all the traces here, or of course you could just grab this pink bar here and scroll through one at a time. This trace is always the top trace here. So the one we are on here is the top trace. And if you want to exclude it, you can just click exclude here, or use the pink knob and exclude that trace or include it back in. So there's a few improvements. I think it works a little bit better. There's some more things I think we want to do here. But you should be able to select an additional peak a little bit easier now. And we've just adjusted some of the workflow parameters as far as what the different buttons and knobs do. I do want to take a second and go into ultrasound. I'm not sure if I have it hooked up here. So concurrent ultrasound works a little bit different now. So it works a little bit better with 2 screens, or with a single screen if you want to. So 2 screens I think is still best for concurrent ultrasound. But when you go into concurrent ultrasound now, it's going to open up the ultrasound window in a floating screen on top of the software. So let that load. And I'm not even sure. Yeah. And then now you can go into the navigator and pick any other test. Actually, I think we have a test set up for that. EMG with concurrent ultrasound. But you can pick any other test, really. You can run any test. This test is just set up to kind of leave room for the ultrasound window. So now you can have ultrasound running on the same monitor as EMG. And so you can scan ultrasound and do needle injections or whatever simultaneously without having to have a second monitor. And the base unit controls follow the window that's active. What I mean by that is, so if you look now, all the base unit controls are for EMG. And then if I click in the ultrasound window, all the base unit controls are controlling the ultrasound. So in 3.0, if you're doing concurrent mode, you had to use your mouse for the ultrasound. But now if you just, as long as you have that window focused, the base unit will control the ultrasound window still, even when you're doing concurrent mode. And this, if you have two monitors, then this window will just go into your second monitor maximized. But if you have one monitor, it'll show up like this, so you can have room and run the full software with ultrasound and any other protocol you want. So when you're in concurrent mode, the ultrasound is always going to stay open. And then when you go to the navigator, you can pick any other test and run any other tests simultaneously with ultrasound. And it's kind of nice because if you just want it sometimes, you can just minimize it and be doing your test, and then it's always right here, and you can bring it back up, scan, look for a nerve or muscle, and then continue on with your test. So there have been some improvements with concurrent ultrasound. Here. The last thing I wanted to cover briefly are reports and some things that you should be aware of when you're doing when you're running when you're upgrading to NCS Plus, and what you need to edit in your report templates. So in the report templates, I'm just going to start a new study here. And we'll go into report template. And so there's new report templates when when you're doing a new install. You'll see these new templates that are specific for EMG Plus and NCS Plus. If you're upgrading someone and they're using like the full report with census generator template, for example, I'm just going to show you. When you right-click on that, you just want to be aware of what tokens the report templates are using based on what software you're using. So if they're using NCS Plus and the tokens you're using are all tab data tables or all tab data waves, those tokens bring in any test that you do regardless of test type. So any test that shows up in tab data will be brought into this report. Okay, so you'll be fine using legacy NCV or NCS Plus or RepStim. Any test that shows up in the navigator is going to show up because you have all tab data waves and all tab data tables. If you're doing if your customer is using a report template, something like this one, where it has specific tokens for specific tables. So here we see we have a NCV motor table and NCV motor waves. If you use this table and they start using NCS Plus, it's not going to bring in your tables or waveforms because it's specific to NCV. So you'd have to come in and go into Sierra Tables and find the NCS Plus table and drag that one in, and the NCS Plus waveforms and drag that in. The reason why you can get them both separate and together is because some people like motors first and sensory second, or interleaved between the data tables and the traces. So we'd want to bring in the motor waves. So you'd have to replace those. You could leave both of those in there. So you could leave NCS Plus and NCV in the report. It's just going to bring in whichever ones you do. Or if they're not going to use NCV anymore, you can just delete those tokens out. So with the report template, when you're upgrading to 3.1, the only time you'll probably need to change it is if they're going to be using NCS Plus. You'll want to go to the report template and make sure that they have the correct tokens in there for NCS Plus, and of course also EMG Plus if they're doing, for example, if we look at one of these just as an example, the default one's in here. I'll answer that question in a second, Agnes, just a second. So when we right-click on the report, you'll notice there's an EMG Plus tables and then MUP tables. So if they want to see the actual MUPs, you need to make sure you have all these tokens in there. The scoring table is going to show up just with the EMG Plus tables or the EMG scoring table. Let me just pull up Agnes's question here, comment here. So Agnes said, oh, I missed that one. Sorry, Luis. Hold on just a second. So Agnes said, I've had some issues that if I select all NCS Plus tables and waveforms, they don't show the sensory. So I have to add the sensory NCS Plus extra. I haven't seen that I'll play with that, and we'll see if we can replicate that, Agnes. It's good to know the fix for it though. So it sounds like she's running into a case where sensory tables aren't showing up when she puts all NCS Plus tables in waveforms. I wonder if you bring in all tab data tables and waveforms, if that works, rather than all NCS Plus tables and waveforms. But I'll play with that and see if I can replicate that. You may have found a bug there. But so for as far as reports go, that is that's the main thing to be aware of, is make sure that your reports are using the correct tokens if you're switching over to NCS Plus. I think it's much easier to start out fresh with NCS Plus. Upgrading someone from NCV to NCS Plus, like I said, does take a little bit of work as far as training them and setting up their tests and reference values, etc. So be prepared for that. And we had one more comment that I missed. Looks like Mohammed said, "Can you make me presenter?" Did you have a question still? Are you there? I missed that question. But our time's up.
I think he just maybe made a mistake.
Okay. So I think I have a few more minutes if you guys have questions. That's the main stuff I wanted to cover for this, just to give you guys an overview of some of the new things in 3.1. Again, make sure you go through the release notes, and of course the help topics are all updated with all this information in it as well, and the help manual. And then the videos that I've done, please let me know if there's specific topics that you'd like me to do additional videos on. Try to make them very specific so that we can keep the videos kind of short, 5 or 10 minutes long. I find people don't like really long videos, so if I keep them short, they'll be more useful to you. But are there any other questions or anything that you want to cover briefly today?
Anyone have questions? Ask now, or else you don't get a chance again. No, just kidding.
All right, and our international support is all trained on this, so they should be able to help you if you email the international support. They should be able to help you with these things as well. Please let me know specifically with feature requests or bugs that you might find. Otherwise, you should be able to direct most of your support to the application support email address. And thanks for your time. And
Agnes says make a video on setting up tables and sites and segments.
Okay, I think there's already videos on there.
Okay.
The video, the Google Drive is a little bit confusing right now, Anita, but my most recent ones are on the Cadwell folder, so you may want to move those over to where.
I'll move them over and share with them. Yeah.
I just made two or three new videos that actually cover test setup and result table setup. But if you need more detail, just let me know. I'll make more.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Abe. Really appreciate this, and thank you everyone for joining. And yeah, we're excited to launch this and upgrade our customers. Thanks a lot, Abe, for all the work you've done and your team.
Thanks for all your patience.
Okay. All right. So we end the meeting here. Thank you, everyone.